Thank you, and thank you for those warm words of welcome. Let me start by giving you just two quotes. The first one: Europe has never been so prosperous, so secure, nor so free. The violence of the first part of the 20th century has given way to a peace and stability unprecedented in European history. And the second quote: Our world is becoming unhinged, geopolitical tensions are rising, global challenges are mounting, and we seem to be incapable of coming together to respond. The first quote was just 2 decades ago. It was the first sentence of the first security strategy of the European Union. And the second was how Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, started his remarks at the annual debate of the UN General Assembly not long ago. Clearly, something has happened. We have entered a world of first turmoil and then a world of outraged dangers, old risks and challenges that didn't go away, new ones that are very rapidly rising. Why did this happen? A world of at least relative geopolitical stability has given way to a world of profound geopolitical change. It's been a somewhat gradual development. I believe we entered what can be described as a period of turmoil and troubles from 2008 and onwards, and then a period of dangers from 2022 and onwards. And what do we see? We see a United States that fears that it will lose forever its preeminent position in global affairs, and accordingly sometimes reacts somewhat nervously. We see a China that is rising for what it sees as a century of humiliation, to claim what it sees as its fair share of global power, and that risks overplaying its hand. The signs are there to be seen. We see a Russia that fears decline and regime change and decides to furiously strike out, that sinks down in aggression and repression. But we also see a Middle East where basic issues of state structures, Israel-Palestine, of social and economic stability and development haven't been properly addressed, and that risks exploding and is now exploding again. And then we also see what is referred to as the middle powers stepping forward and saying we are also here and asserting their interests: Turkey, India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, and others. And as a consequence of all of this, we see the rise of conflicts and even of wars. It's Ukraine and the Middle East that dominates the headlines now. But not very far from our shores is the horror of Sudan. 10 million people displaced in fighting, and the entire belt of coups and dangers and disasters from Dakar to Djibouti. That is the geopolitical tension rising and all the consequences, the first of the global trends. The other big global trend is, of course, the rapid rise of global challenges: climate change, pandemics, migration, and others. These are the issues that can only be handled by working together. But torn apart by the rising geopolitical tensions, the ability of countries to work together is unfortunately declining. The UN Security Council these days can hardly agree on when to meet, much less on what to do. And the results? Risks are rising across the board, and our ability to handle them is declining. We've just come out of a pandemic that took millions of lives and caused, as we still remember, a near-death experience for the global economy. But we were lucky. COVID was most certainly contagious, but it was, as a matter of fact, not particularly deadly. Some of you might remember the first COVID, SARS, in 2003. It was substantially less contagious, but it was substantially more deadly. If we are confronted with a virus X, as is talked about, that is as contagious as COVID and as deadly as SARS, it could be nothing less than a civilization-shattering event. Are we ready? Are we prepared? The global panel that has been tasked to monitor our preparedness gave its answer some days in a big report some days ago, and their answer was a resounding no. We are not as ready as we should be. Then, to add to the list, of course, climate change is a reality. August was the warmest month, the warmest August ever recorded. And month after month, we see the same. We see how extreme weather events are becoming more common. It could be storms, it could be floods, it could be all sorts of other things. Things that will increasingly affect a number of different aspects of our societies and economies. There is no longer any space for deniers. We must in all different ways handle and seek to mitigate the more immediate risks. They will be with us more and more, and they will be increasingly demanding. There's no way around that. But even more important, of course, is the huge transition of the entire global economy from a near total dependence of fossil fuel, a near total dependence of fossil fuel for more than 2 centuries, to a necessary near total farewell to them, a transition that has to happen in just a couple of decades. That will affect virtually everything in our economies with all sorts of consequences, not all of them entirely easy to foresee. In some days, the world will come together at COP29 in Baku in Azerbaijan and try to agree on answers and common action. Will they be able to come together and agree on the additional steps that must be taken? We will see. What we do know is that if we don't act together, there is a risk also that we will start approaching what scientists are calling tipping points, where things could suddenly go from bad to much worse. The risk of that happening is probably still fairly small, but the consequences, if it does happen, would be vast, and we need to act according to that. And to these global challenges, we must add the effect of the tsunami of technological and scientific change as we exit the industrial age and enter the digital one. Artificial intelligence will have a revolutionary impact. There are huge possibilities, but there are also, as we are aware, profound risks. And with synthetic biology, the same applies to perhaps an even greater degree. We are entering truly uncharted territory. Where then is our Europe in all of this? I think our European Union has performed rather well as a crisis manager during the years of black swans that we have gone through. You remember them, or we remember them well: the global financial crisis, the euro crisis, the refugee crisis, and then everything after February 2022 with war coming back to Europe. It certainly, not seldom, looks rather messy, with all the hasty meetings in Brussels, as presidents and prime ministers recognized that no nation can handle the suddenly emerging issues on their own. And they just have to go to Brussels, sit down around the table, and try to agree on some sort of common approach. But at the end of the day, it has worked. Europe has delivered. But if we look ahead, the strains are undoubtedly increasing. First and foremost, due to the effects of Russia's full-scale aggression against Ukraine. Millions of refugees, many billions of dollars or euros to support a nation struggling to defend itself, effects on global and regional markets from energy to food. It is a large war. The front line stretches 1,200 kilometers. The number of killed or seriously wounded is counted in hundreds of thousands. Russia is estimated to lose more than 1,000 lives every day. Ukraine, significantly less, but still a lot. And we must recognize that it's a war with fronts stretching well into our societies. The Russian secret services have been tasked with conducting and encouraging sabotage and disturbance operations throughout our society. It is a big war with big armies, but it is also a hybrid war without a clear front line. The digital domain, the systems that we are becoming increasingly dependent upon for virtually everything, is certainly also part of that particular battlefield. And there is also a new merger that we see coming between criminal elements and state-sponsored threats. We see that almost daily. When and how will this war end? I wish I knew. No one does. But it's not going to end tomorrow. There is no quick fix, although someone on the other side of the Atlantic seems to be under the illusion that there is. Fundamentally, it ends with either us extending our stability towards the East, with a safe and secure Ukraine within the European Union, or with the Kremlin managing to extend its instability gradually towards the West by its policies of destruction, of destabilization, and of domination. Ukraine in the EU and Vladimir Putin no longer in the Kremlin, only then will we be able to speak about peace again. It's going to be a long road, and there are dangers, profound dangers along that road. We are all increasing defense spending. It's primarily to deter further aggression beyond what we see today. We must all help Ukraine. It's many billions of euros, but still less than 0.3% of our combined economy. The cost of failure would be far higher than that. And we can do it, even if the United States were to start to waver. It's a question of political will. But Europe is of course also affected by the rising tension between the United States and China. There is a lot of speculation about a war over Taiwan, which for sure would have very grave effects for the global economy. although I would put that risk rather low on the list of major challenges, at least for the next few years. But the Americans want to tighten the screws on part of the Chinese economy, and they ask us to follow in their path. Our interests are not identical. We are economies far more dependent on an open global economy and an open market. We Europeans trade as much as the United States and China taken together. But we have a profound also security interest in a strong transatlantic relationship. We need to work together. And the balancing of policies here certainly isn't going to be entirely easy in the years ahead. And then, of course, we don't know what the Americans will be up to in the coming years. We have, as you might have noticed from the media, we have an American election coming up in just 2 weeks, with no one being particularly certain about the result. But the outcome is going to be massively important, primarily for the United States, but also for us. One of the candidates, I'm diplomatic, I don't mention any names, have questioned our security relationship. And the same candidate has promised massive tariffs on all trade with China and substantial tariffs also on all other imports. And the same candidate dislikes the EU, distrusts international cooperation, and dismisses the UN and all other different international bodies of cooperation. Were that candidate to be the choice of the American electorate, we will be undoubtedly heading for a rough ride, even perhaps for a very rough ride. Can we manage? Yeah, we can, if we stay together. But can we stay together? The politics of our European countries is getting more fragmented. Parties that were large in the past aren't as large any longer. New forces are entering the arena. And we see the rise of populist forces questioning many of the policies that have been essential for the success story that our union is. Look only at the recent national elections in France, the Netherlands, Austria. And next year, an important election coming up in Germany. There are difficult issues to be tackled in order also to meet these populist challenges. These don't come from nowhere. On migration, it is obvious that the EU needs a higher fence, although that is far easier said than it's actually done. You saw how that issue dominated the EU summit last week. But it should be equally obvious that we also need a large door. Many of our economies and countries are facing demographic decline. We need overall 1 million or so new hands in our economy every year. Otherwise, economic decline is certain to follow. That's another area where the balancing of policies won't be entirely easy in the years ahead. And we need to take the competitiveness of our economies more seriously than has been done. The recent report by Mario Draghi has laid out part of the necessary agenda of integrating capital markets, of deepening the single market, and massively increased spending on research and development. We can't have a situation where the United States is the innovation superpower, China is the production superpower, and we are just the regulation superpower. That's a recipe for decline, and that must be reversed. As a new team takes shape in Brussels, it does face a daunting agenda. Our security is at risk. Our prosperity is under threat. Our place in the world can't be taken for granted. You might, I'm quite certain, have noted that one of the new buzzwords in Brussels is de-risking. It was introduced by Ursula von der Leyen in connection with discussions on our economic relationship with China. And it has since been taken up also on the other side of the Atlantic. Everyone talks of de-risking. I've been slightly critical of the term. First, because it's hardly new. Assessing risk is what business always does. Risks versus opportunities. Nothing new there. And second, because de-risking in terms of eliminating risks simply ain't possible. They will always be there. And the greatest risk of all is believing that they aren't. Risk management, what you do, will, unfortunately, be part of the core business of political leaders throughout Europe in the years ahead. It has been, indeed, a profound change since the years of that quote that I started quoting to you in the beginnings. There is certainly reason to be concerned. Things could go very wrong. The risk of even greater wars can't be dismissed, but there's also hope. We are, at least in Europe, learning to work better together. We are learning to increase the resilience of our societies. And there are all the possibilities coming from the tsunami of scientific and technological advance I mentioned. Europe is in a critical position. We are more exposed to some of these rising dangers. War is closer. Global value chains are more important. Migration pressures are more acute. But perhaps we can also take some leads in handling the new risks, of supporting Ukraine, of showing global leadership in the green transition, of building structures of cooperation, of safeguarding an open global economy. Risks are rising, but so are opportunities. It's dangerous times ahead, but also times for profound leadership. Thank you.